Hi, welcome to Head Start, the podcast for race directors and the business of putting on races. Most races only come around once a year. So when you're working to improve a race for your participants, you've got precious few opportunities to receive feedback from them. So how do you use those opportunities right? And what feedback should you look to gather from them? Well, my guest today, Laurel Park, has the unique privilege of being both a race director and a PhD in survey design, and has helped countless organizations develop effective surveys that leverage customer feedback to inform strategic decisions. As the president of the Ann Arbor Track Club, Laurel knows running and races inside out, and today she'll help us understand how to craft an actionable race survey, how to maximize survey response rates, and how to avoid some of the common pitfalls of survey design, like asking things you shouldn't care to know about, or asking things you do care to know about in a way that delivers poor quality or unusable results. If you do send out a race survey after your event or have thought of doing so, this is an excellent crash course in getting the most of the one shot you get each year to gather productive feedback from your participants. So stay tuned. Before we get into all that though, I'd like to give a quick shout out to the amazing sponsors supporting this podcast. Many thanks to Run Sign Up, Race Director's favorite all-in-one technology solution for endurance and fundraising events, now powering more than 26,000 in-person, virtual and hybrid events. And many thanks to RaceCheck, whose free RaceCheck review box widget can help you collect and showcase your participant feedback on your own website, helping you more easily convert website visitors into paying participants. We'll be hearing a bit more from these two great companies a little later in the podcast. But now, let's dive into actionable race survey design with Ann Arbor Track Club's Laurel Park. Laurel, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you very much. Glad to be here.
Well, thank you very much for coming on. I'm going to guess that you're based in Ann Arbor. Is that right?
You're going to guess correctly. I should have put on my Go Blue sweatshirt, but didn't think of it.
Yes, because one aspect of you is being the president of the Ann Arbor Track Club.
That is correct.
Do you want to tell us a little bit about that? The kinds of stuff you do at the club, your involvement with it, maybe some of the races you guys put on?
The Ann Arbor Track Club has been in existence for, I think this is our 53rd year going into it. We serve as a community resource for running, race walking. We actually, despite the name of track, we really don't do track events much anymore, although we have an all-comers meet every year. I have been involved with the club in one capacity or another for, more years than I care to admit. But I'll just say it's been more than about 30 years. I actually, cute story, my husband and I met at an Ann Arbor Track Club workout. It was his second day in town and we met. So yes, I owe much gratitude to the Ann Arbor Track Club. We have one signature event that's a kind of a local mainstay race. It's called the Dexter Ann Arbor Run. As the name suggests, it is a half marathon. And it runs from a little town west of us, Dexter, and finishes in downtown Ann Arbor. It started as a 15-miler and has evolved over the years. We also have accompanying events of a 10K and a 5K, but that's kind of our big signature event. And as president, and I've been involved with that race for 20 years. I've been on the race committee and I've run it and all sorts of different things. And right now the club is we're looking forward, having come out of the pandemic where everything shut down. It's a good time to say, okay, and we're actually doing this. What's the next chapter? What's the next phase of this club? We have a very, very vibrant running community in Ann Arbor, the University of Michigan. So it's a very activity oriented town. So we are figuring out what we do next. We have a very popular and vibrant youth program as well. We've had some of the graduates of that program have actually gone on to the Olympics. So it's a high quality program as well.
You mentioned the University of Michigan there, which is also in Ann Arbor. You've done lots of work with the university. You also got your PhD from the university in survey design and analysis. Do you want to tell us also a little bit about that part of your life as well?
Yeah, I have actually 3 degrees from the university. I have the hat trick, as one of my friends said. You've completed the hat trick there if you're a hockey fan. And so I worked for the university for several years after graduating initially. and then in student affairs. And then I decided to go on and do a PhD in higher ed since I enjoyed the environment so much. And hadn't really planned to go into survey design, or it's actually my program was organizational development. A big part of that was training in research methodology, which initially was not kind of my cup of tea. But as I got more into it, learning how to conduct research studies, survey design was a big one. I took a lot of courses in survey design, questionnaire design, research methods. I just became more and more interested in that. So following my graduation from my PhD program, I worked for several years at the University of Michigan doing data management. Basically, I did enrollment counts. I worked with the university's database, and I also did a lot of survey analysis, different surveys, none that I wrote. Most of them were surveys that the university was putting out or another organization, and I would do the analysis of the data on that. And that, I won't say that was my favorite part because all of it was very enjoyable, but it was very interesting to me to see what the results were. I guess I've always enjoyed helping people find answers. Even when I worked with students, I need help with this. Let me figure it out. And so looking through that data it's really interesting to see what the answers were, what the results to this particular survey topic were. And I've been doing that for the past about 5 years now. Wow. I've been doing it not full time, but on a consulting as need basis. Track Club has taken up most of my time recently, but I reach out and let people know I have training in surveys. I enjoy doing them. I enjoy analyzing them. So I've had a few people come up to me and say, willing to help out or take a look at this. I'm like, sure. Why not? My background, I work with the Track Club. I ran for the University of Michigan way back in the day. I ran competitively for several years. I'm still involved in running. I have the background. I have the knowledge. I have the context. So when a race director or someone comes to me, I understand that perspective and I can use that in helping someone design a survey or, whatever they need me to do. I've been there. It's just fun. That's the bottom line. It's just fun.
Yeah. And I think we can definitively say from that, you are by far the most qualified person to have on an episode on race survey. You have the running background, you have the racing, you have the club on one end. So you understand all of that stuff. And then you're obviously very, very knowledgeable on the design process of a survey, what the objective of a survey is and all that. So let's jump straight into that. I think we should start with the basics. I won't quite ask you what a race survey is because most people would have filled some of those or seen some of those or seen surveys in general. But I will ask you, what is the purpose of a race survey? Starting from that.
The opportunity to gather useful information that a race director or race committee can act upon. We call that actionable information. So in addition to getting the what being, did you like the race? Did this go well? Yes, no. What? The why. What could we do to improve this? Other underlying questions of, I'm trying to think of off the top of my head, were there adequate water stops? So beyond just it was good, it was bad. What in particular? What worked? What didn't? And then take that information back and say, okay, here are some things that we need to look at for next year, or here are some things that we're doing well. And we put that into our planning for our next event.
So it's basically, the survey you're saying is a tool that you use to gather sort of answers to questions you have, but always with a view of making something of it, right?
Yeah, I think so. A survey is a project, a good survey, and there's really no point in launching a bad survey. Garbage in, garbage out. But a good survey, it takes some time, it takes some effort, and it takes some knowledge to do it properly. You want to keep that in mind. You want to do a good job of it, and then you gather that useful information and you use it as part of your complete race package.
And is a survey then something that typically races or other organizations or other events would aim to do every year and perhaps like establish a standard so they can compare answers across years? Is that sort of like part of it, or would you only do it when you have something specific to ask or specific years or something like that?
Really the answer to that is it depends on your purpose for the survey. I'm very a strong advocate of doing them every year because you do get that, what we call longitudinal data, that long-term data. You can look over the years and you can say, have things changed? Have things shifted and so on? If your event is relatively young, that can be useful. But as I said, doing a survey takes time and effort, is a project. If you don't have time to do it, I think it's useful to do it on occasion. It gives you a kind of good feedback on where you are and what your participants, what your customers think of the event, and the ideas that they have. And I've been in a lot of meetings, race committee meetings, professional meetings where you have everybody sits around and they try and guess what people want, usually concerning the t-shirt. I've been in more t-shirt conversations. So you're trying to guess at, well, would they like this? Would they like that? Would they like that? And, my response is ask them. Try and find out what they're feeling. And if it is a rather major change to the event, and sometimes those are constrained, whatever the customer wants isn't necessarily what you can do. You have other constraints, but if you're saying, would they like A, would they like B? Ask. That's my response to that is ask them.
Yeah. I mean, to me, it sounds like a very obvious tool to be using. I mean, in any industry, let alone events, you hear people stress the importance of getting customer feedback. So it's really important on that end. And still, I don't really see also in races I participate or races I follow, I don't actually see people use race surveys as much as I'd expect on the back of how useful I think they can be. Do you think that might be because of the effort involved or because people don't appreciate the value of a survey? Why don't we see more surveys being done in the industry?
I think particularly with races, it does come down to the effort involved. I think everybody is, at least the majority of race directors that I'm familiar with, even if they're not specifically knowledgeable about survey design, it's a customer driven industry. So they appreciate the value of getting the customer's viewpoint. I think in terms of races in particular, there are a couple of things that jump out. Doing a survey, it's an additional project that gets added to the work of putting on the race. And, anybody who's been involved in putting on a race, big race, small race, there are a lot of moving parts and there are a lot of things that have to be done. And the survey is something that doesn't have to be done. So it's lower on the priority scale. And that doesn't mean that the race director doesn't appreciate the value of it. But, when you come down to scarce hands, human resources to get things done, particularly these days, everybody's looking for volunteers. It's not a critical aspect of the event. So you have to take care of those. And I think the other part of it is the timing of it. A survey is something that takes place after the event. And that's where all of the energy is focused, is let's get this event done. Let's make it a successful event. The energy and the motivation after that, your race is finished. I've been there. You do the finish. You're cleaning up the finish line and you're like, wow, I'm emotionally exhausted. I'm physically exhausted. And I kind of liken it to, after a big family dinner and suddenly people realize, oh man, we got to do the dishes and wash the pots and pans, and nobody really wants to do that. So there's really not much motivation. If you have someone who is dedicated to doing it and is not needed for other a critical task, that person can handle that. And that's actually one of the things that I always recommend to pretty much anybody who's going to do a survey. Designate a project manager. Designate somebody who is going to be responsible for doing this. I always kind of quiver a little bit when I'm in a meeting and they go, well, we should do a survey. We should do a survey. And there's kind of blank stares and a moment of silence. And somebody finally says, all right, fine. I'll put together some questions and put it up on the website. And I kind of cringe. I was like, well, okay, but, that's not the most effective way to get that information.
But of course, the survey, it's something you could have prepared in advance, right? I mean,
absolutely.
It's not something that you need to wait until after the race to put it together. So in principle, because I totally get your point, stepping into the shoes of someone who's been through that, done the event, really your motivation, like everything after that gets so much harder to do. But it's not something that you need to start doing after the race.
Well, but to a point, you've got to analyze the results after the race. There's two phases to doing a survey. There's kind of a before and after. And the before is writing the survey, selecting your population, getting all of that launched. And it's kind of the same kind of parallel to doing a race. So you've got all that time and energy. You do your survey, you enter your survey on the survey software, you launch your survey, and you're like, oh man, it's gone. It's launched. We're getting responses. Well, then you've got all these responses. Your job isn't over. The second phase, which could be more time consuming than the first phase, depending on how many responses you get, is you got to go through, you've got to analyze your responses, you've got to, do some descriptives or some charts, whatever it takes to communicate your responses properly. Ideally, you're going to write up a little report. That takes time. You can do a lot of preparation, but there isn't really anything you can do in advance to analyze the results until you get them.
Yeah, I get that. Thinking of basically who the survey is addressed to, surveys sent to participants, various questions about the event. Would it also make sense to send a survey to volunteers, maybe a different survey, or are surveys traditionally just for sort of like paying customers?
It is. Surveys are for whomever is going to give you the information you need to improve your event. And back up I actually am not backing up. I might skip ahead to something we're going to cover, but you know what? I'm going to spill the beans now. I always tell people when you're thinking of designing a survey, don't think of it in terms of we want to know, because there's a lot of things you want to know. Think of it in terms of what is the question we're trying to answer. So the question could be, would participants return to our event? Would participants recommend our event? Do participants feel that the race was worth the entry fee? Something like that. You've got to have kind of this big question. What's the key thing you want to get out of the survey? Well, then you think, okay, what's the information I need to answer that question? And that information then becomes your survey questions. And it keeps you from kind of I call it the mission creep, where you start with 10. Well, we should ask about this. Everybody in the race committee, well, almost everybody will have an opinion about that. So that's the focus of it. So the question you may have regarding your volunteers is probably going to be very different from the question you have regarding your race participants. The value of the information you get, it depends on who provides it. You want to have people who are knowledgeable and can give you valuable, useful information. There's an ad up in Ann Arbor that's kind of a joke. It's for a local finance company, and it says, would you take investment advice from your yoga instructor? I kind of chuckle because in Ann Arbor you probably would, but that's the same kind of thing. Who's going to give you? And if you're asking about your race, it is probably going to be your participants, or I usually suggest send it to your registrants because you have that data file. You have everybody who registered. If they didn't participate, they're probably not going to respond. I don't worry too much about people jumping in there saying, oh, I'm going to try and hijack this survey and give bad, people. That's not real high on the ways to waste time, I don't think, is to do rogue surveys. So whoever is qualified to give you that knowledgeable information.
And the surveys you send out to participants, focusing on that, should they be anonymous? So basically, you share the same link, no personal information, you send it out to everyone. As you say, there's a small chance, but no one really want to waste their time that someone outside of that circle takes it. Or would you actually want to also know by name who's filling in the survey?
It depends somewhat on the situation, but generally, if you're using your registration list, you can generally download that registration list as a CSV file and load it into a survey software, SurveyMonkey, Qualtrics, something like that, and use that. Clean it of the really personal information. You don't want the date of birth on there. You don't want the address and so on. There are two aspects to collecting data for this. One is to be anonymous. If you're offering an incentive, you can't be completely anonymous because you got to know who to send the incentive to. So anonymous is one thing, and that is you cannot link a particular response or group of responses to a particular individual. And the other, which is much more common, is confidential, which is there is some type of identifying information there. frequently it's just an email address. It could be a first name and last name. And then confidential is either it's only going to be shared with the person doing the survey, who is going to then take the responses and what we call aggregate them, bring them together. So no individual responses will be distributed. Responses will be distributed in aggregated form only. Or it means that you are going to share that information with only a few people, a few individuals. I think I actually know that one of the barriers for some people to taking a survey is, I'll be glad to give you the information, but depending on the topic, I don't really want you to broadcast that it's from me, which I would never do anyway. So you have to balance that. Now, a race survey, you're probably not asking about really sensitive information, but you could get some responses that you go, well, that's useful information, and I want to make sure that the person who was willing to share that, it doesn't come back on them. It doesn't, err on the side of caution there. You can send out a link. I'm not a fan of putting links on websites, and I'll get to that in a minute. But if you have a population file, the people who are going to give you this knowledgeable information, and anybody that does the survey using that link knows what they're talking about, and of course you're not offering an incentive, sure, you can have one link and send it out, and it can be anonymous because the people, everybody it's going to is going to be useful.
Yeah. The next question after that would be that if I do have the name and contact information maybe of every person filling in my survey, what happens if I get tempted to reach out and respond to someone who perhaps, writes some negative comments about my event, or maybe I even want to follow up on some suggestion they may have had, on one of my open-ended questions. Is that something that I can do, something I would want to do, something I'd want to avoid? What's the etiquette there on surveys?
My take on this is, if you think you may want to interact with any of your respondents, you put a little checkbox at the end and you say, you may contact me. I give you my permission. It is okay for you to contact me regarding any of my responses. Now realize if you do that and somebody gives you that allows you to do that, you're going to have to take the extra time to contact them. I don't tend to reach out to people who have given me responses, regardless of what the response is. And in general, I am the researcher. I try not to get personally, emotionally involved in what they're talking about, even if I'm involved in the race, putting on the race or something. You really have to kind of take a step back and look at this as research data, and not try and read too much into it and create some distance. I just recommend to people that unless somebody has said, and this has happened in open-ended questions where they say, feel free to contact me if you want more information about that. Boom, you have permission to do it.
Yet another aspect of this might be, I guess, if you have personal information there that track back to your registrations, to your participants, perhaps you may also want to link that to a CRM and use some of those answers maybe to tailor your marketing to those people. Is that so? Basically, data, is it typical or even something that people might do to use data from a race survey to then market to people in a different way or reach out to people after the survey in a different way?
I personally would not do that. There's a fine line between collecting data for informational purposes and collecting data for marketing purposes. And you're really, you're blurring that boundary, and people are overloaded with surveys. People are hesitant to complete surveys anyway. And if they feel that their information is going to be used for marketing in any way, or is going to be shared with any other organization that is in turn going to use it for marketing outside of the organization, the race committee or the race, whatever club is putting on the event, then they're probably not going to be as motivated to respond. And I will sometimes say, depending on the survey and the topic of the survey, I will say right in the invitation message that this data will not be shared outside of the organization, and it will not be shared or sold for any type of marketing purposes. It will be used solely by the race committee to improve the event. I make it clear up front.
Yeah, I think that's a good tip to get people sort of like comfortable with how their data is being used. Of course, in Europe, much stricter regulations around that as well. But definitely, always a great idea to be upfront with people on how their data is being used. Beyond personal data, sort of like, like name, email, just to be able to sort of like identify someone taking the survey. What are the kinds of information would I want to ask of respondents on my survey to make my survey, maybe my segmentation of results down the line, a little bit more helpful?
Generally, gender. And I caution against asking people for their specific age. For some reason, asking somebody for their specific age, I think they're either hesitant to do that or they are afraid that that's going to be used to identify them. I tend to ask for an age group. Some people don't mind if age is done. And again, you think through, I've seen some race surveys that will ask, is this your first race? That can be helpful because you can segregate out those that, this is my first time. What was the experience of the first timers? What were their responses? Or you can ask, how many races do you run in a year? Again, it comes down to what's going to be helpful to you to improve your event. I do caution about asking too many, again, anything that leads people to believe that in some way they're going to be identified by responding. And for a lot of small races, and I certainly take this into account, if I'm analyzing results for an event around here, odds are I probably know a lot of the people in that event. So I don't want to know what their responses are. I want it to be anonymous. And I think that's in people's minds too. If this organization is going to be looking at the responses I give, they're probably going to figure out who I am. And so I try to really, really lessen that. And some people don't care. It's not a threatening topic, or the data they're giving, the information they're giving is not, highly classified or whatever. But I always try to err on the side of the comfort of whomever is taking the survey. And the more comfortable they feel, the more likely they are to respond.
Yes. And how likely are people really, when it comes to it, to respond truthfully to questions? Because you mentioned already that, there's a degree of self-awareness when people take surveys. You already mentioned the fact that they may not feel comfortable sharing some stuff or some information about themselves. We all have biases of all sorts when we respond to these kinds of things. What I'm really getting at is, me as the person running the survey and looking at the results, how much can I trust them that what people say or their intents or their declared intents would match what people would actually do?
There's been, not surprisingly, there's been research on this. There's been research on pretty much everything. And it was a different type of survey. It was research, I believe, on a research-oriented survey. But for the most part, people respond truthfully. Unless if it's a really highly sensitive or seemingly threatening topic, and then they might be a little less likely. But in general, in a race survey, I trust it. I always tell people, if you get a really strange result, so if you look and go, wow, 50% of my respondents strongly agree that we need to raise the entry fee, then I go back and look at the question, or I look at the response scale. And I go, that just doesn't make sense. And sometimes it is kind of a, wow, this was not the response I expected. But sometimes there's an error, the response scale got twisted, or the question was phrased in a manner that the way it read to you was not the way it read to other people. You cannot go back and validate every single response. So you have to trust that the information they give you is going to be authentic. And again, I keep coming back to, you ask the people that are going to be invested in this survey.
So you've got your survey all worked out, you know what you want to know, and have crafted an awesome survey that's going to give you the answers you need to make your race better. But how do you distribute it to your participants in a nice, elegant way without spending hours upon hours hacking email templates and moving data back and forth between your registration platform and email marketing software? Well, the answer is you do everything in one place with free integrated email marketing from RunSignup. Integrated is the keyword here. The minute you have your survey set up, you can include that survey link in a beautifully crafted email that gets sent out from your RunSignup dashboard to all the registered participants in your race, or whomever you choose to send your race survey out to. And, as we've been discussing with Laurel, you don't have to wait to set all this up until after the end of your race. You can schedule your race survey email to go out exactly when you want it to go out for minimum hassle and maximum effect. That's the beauty of platforms like Run Signup that are built with races at the core. Every tool you use, whether it's email marketing or fundraising or race results, taps into the same participant data, updated in real time without you having to do a thing. So, to learn more about Run Signup's native email marketing capabilities and so many other awesome free tools and features, make sure to visit runsignup.com. That's runsignup.com. And check out all the amazing ways Run Signup's market-leading race technology can take your event to the next level. Okay, that's it from me for now. Now, let's rejoin Laurel and our chat on actionable race survey design. Let's look then a little bit closer at survey design, how you put one of these things together. I'm guessing, otherwise that should have been a very short PhD, there's no one-size-fits-all on surveys.
There's really not. Again, it goes back to what is it you're trying to learn from this particular survey. And I already described what is the question you're trying to answer. You do want to try and keep a survey fairly short. I think we're going to talk about response rates and how to maximize response rates in a minute here. But one of the key factors there is don't make it a chore. People do not want to spend, half an hour on a Saturday afternoon responding to 58 questions about, were the mile markers bright enough on your course, something like that, which don't ask that question. But you want to try and keep it short. Now, what short means for some races is going to be different from others. The questions you need to effectively answer your big question, but no more.
So you're saying there's basically, which I think makes total sense, there's a bit of a trade-off between the longer the survey, the less incentivized people would be to fill it in. So there's that kind of balance. So you're saying pick your battles, choose the really important stuff you want to know about, and go with those.
Yeah, and responses drop off in long surveys. You see this all the time. And I'm saying more than about 25 questions. And, some of the research surveys I've worked with have been pretty intense and pretty, responses drop off after a certain point. So you'll get, the highest percentage of response. Everybody will answer the first 15 questions. And then it starts to drop. And by the time you get to question 40, you have about half the number of respondents you had for question 1 because they get tired of it. It takes to do a survey well as a respondent, it takes some thought. It's a mental exercise too. And you don't want to have to put people through that. Again, don't make it a chore.
With the kind of principle that people advise that we approach maybe writing an email or writing anything, does it make sense to basically have your draft and then go back with a critical eye and maybe take things out? So ask yourself, do I really need this kind of thing?
Yeah. Sometimes what I will do is I just kind of brainstorm going back to what's the information I need to answer this question. And I just write them all down. And I go, here's what comes to mind, here's what comes to mind, here's what comes to mind. And then I take a look at that. Can this information be gathered in some other manner? Do we already have this somewhere? Is this something that we will really be able to use, that we can take action on this? So I always tell people, don't ask about anything that you cannot change or you will not change, because you're not going to change it. If you can't change your starting time, that's from our event. We have some parameters on the starting time of our race, and we can't change it. So we don't ask people, should the race start earlier? Because we can't do anything about it. Also, is this question as phrased going to give me useful information? And if you have a good idea of what you need to know in order to answer your big question, it's not a hard process. It's a really, like you said, go away and have fresh eyes look at it.
I think, there's probably not a definitive answer on this, but for a typical race survey, or I guess in terms of the sweet spot of people's attention and getting as many responses as you could get, what's a good length for a survey? We're talking how many questions roughly?
There's research on that too. I generally try to keep a race survey to about 15 to 20, but I hate to keep going back to this. It depends. But you can have I've seen some really very effective race surveys that, are 10 questions. And boom, they hit on all the important things. I've seen some really effective race surveys that are 10 to 15 questions. or excuse me, 15 to 20 questions, just keeping in mind that, you can ask as many questions as you feel is necessary, but there does come a point where people are going to say, okay, I've had enough. I suggest breaking them into sections. So I generally will do 5 questions, next page or next section. Because if you continue to go, and here's another one, and here's another one, and here's another one, you get this feeling of, is this never going to end? This is this endless survey that just goes on. And psychologically, it kind of sort of gives people a break. You can put the little, page 1 of 2, page 2 of 2. So they have an idea of how much time and effort is awaiting them, is still to come.
And for a well-designed survey along a moderate length, broken up in sections, like all those good practices, what kind of response rate should I sort of expect if everything's done well?
A really good response rate would be about 40% or higher. And you're getting good representative feedback from your audience. 30% is fine. I generally read results from any survey that's 20, less than 20%. I still look at the responses and I'll sort of look at the data, but I'm like, well, this is a really small representation of the people in this event, which could be interpreted in a couple of ways. It could be you're only hearing from the people who have complaints. It could be that, maybe a lot of people are really satisfied with what you're doing and don't feel the need to respond. You just don't know. The keys to getting a good response rate are, first of all, people have to be interested in the topic. And that's where choosing your population comes in. They have to be invested in what they're doing. They have to feel that their participation is valued. It's going to be worth their time to take this survey. Incentives, absolutely, incentives help. That has been shown time and time again. And as I've already mentioned a couple of times, making sure that the survey is not a chore. Make it quick and easy, design it well so they don't have to jump through many hoops to get it done.
Since you mentioned making people feel like their responses are gonna be valued, I sort of see that, why it would work, but how do you make that happen? How do you design a survey that makes, or maybe a reach out that makes people comfortable that their response will be valued?
It is primarily in the reach out. And it is really making people feel that they have been selected to do this, which is exactly what you're doing. I'm a strong proponent of a personalized email invitation, and where you have your message is, who's doing the survey? Why is the survey being done? What do we hope to gain from this? Why is this person invited? And generally for a race, you know that, but you could even say, your participation in the 2022 Dexter Ann Arbor run, makes you, important to us that you respond, get your feedback. This one I think is really important too. How many questions is the survey, and approximately how much time is going to be needed to complete it? Give them that up front, and that also motivates you to try and keep it as short and succinct as possible, because you don't want to say, well, this is going to be 50 questions and you're going to take 25 minutes. No, let them know what they're getting into. And that creates some goodwill. Okay, this is what I'm signing up for. When does the survey close? When is the last date to respond? And this too, I think, is important. Tell them how the results are going to be used. And I don't mean you have to say specifically, but say, we're going to use these responses to improve the event for next year. Or if you have a specific reason, we're thinking of changing the date of this event. Your responses are going to help us determine what the new date of the event will be. If you're offering an incentive, what is the incentive? And are there any parameters for having that incentive? Generally not an issue with a race survey, but in some surveys you may want to say you must complete the entire survey to qualify for the incentive. And that's, special consideration, or a certain type of survey. And then I always kind of joke about this, but it's true. Include the link to the survey. Don't forget to do that. I've gotten invitations sometimes where I'm like, this is awesome. How do I get to it? So I always, when I'm writing up one of these invitation messages, generally what I do before I get caught up in the details, first thing I do is at the bottom, I paste the link to the survey so it's there. So I don't get it all nice, read everything, send it out and get a bunch of There's no link.
Yeah, I guess people would be, yeah, what? Of course, I'll put a link. But then I hit all those race websites that don't have a date on the first page or a registration button. So that's sort of like similar to that.
Yeah. And, I think too, one of the things you try and get across in a survey, in really any type of survey, is you're taking this seriously. You're putting time into it, that it's professional. The feeling that it's professional, the feeling that you are really serious about what you're doing. And I think putting together a detailed invitation message shows people you've done your homework. You've thought about this. We're very serious about wanting you to participate. And that is a very appealing. I kind of do an analogy of, are you more likely to go to an event, a lecture, a gathering, whatever, if you receive a personalized invitation to it, or if you see a flyer posted up at a coffee shop? You're probably more likely to respond to the individual or to the direct invitation. That's the same philosophy here.
This professionalism you mentioned should also carry through into the actual style and the aesthetic of the survey as well, right? I guess you don't want to stamp your personality or your personal preferences about, like floral patterns or, serif font or whatever on it.
Yes. Again, make it look professional. Keep it simple, stupid. For the engineers out there, the KISS principle. I tell people you obviously want to have the logo and the title of your event. Possibly if it's a club putting it on or whomever's putting it on. If you have a name sponsor, that might be part of the contract, is to be on all of your promotional materials and follow-up materials. I tell people you don't get any bonus points for creativity. Again, you want people to be able to get in there, take it, and leave. So, don't have your race mascot dancing up in the corner. Don't have a slideshow of photos going across the top that's going to distract people. One of the more annoying surveys that I personally ever received about a year ago was where you opened up the survey and the questions faded in and out as you went to them. So question 1 faded, it came from the background into the fore. I answered it. It disappeared into the mist. The second one, I got so annoyed with that, I couldn't focus on the survey, and I just shut it down. And what you're dealing with here is what we call cognitive load, which is the number of things your brain has to focus on at any one time. The psychologists out there may scream at my very, very rough lay explanation of this, but basically you want to make sure that your respondents can focus on the task at hand, which is answering the survey. So if you're in a car and you come to a 4-way intersection in a big city, there's a lot going on. There's a lot you have to take into account. Now, your task here is to safely proceed through the intersection. You've got other cars, you've got buildings, you've got pedestrians, you've got all sorts of things. So it takes more for you to make that determination. Whereas if you're doing this out in the country or out in a smaller area, you come to the stop sign, you look around, are there other cars? There are not a lot of things distracting you. You can make that decision pretty quickly and move forward. So that's what you're trying to get at. With the fonts, they have to be easy to read. On any device, and realize people are not going to just be taking it on a laptop or a desktop. You've got to test this on different devices and see different browsers interpret different color patterns differently. I say stick with the black font. Don't try again to get creative. I was signing a release form on a survey a couple of months ago, and it was a company that worked with animals, and so the motif, the theme, was soft pastel colors, and the release had been written in this. I think it was supposed to be a soft pastel blue, which completely faded into the background on my Chromebook. And I finally emailed her and I said, I can't read this. I literally cannot read this. So, trying to get that theme, that branding across, which I understand, but, your number one goal here is, people have to be able to do this. So I say do a fairly large, I don't mean 18 point, but you do want it 12 or higher, simple font. Take a look at your population, young people, old people. You want to make sure that everybody can read what you're doing. Read your survey.
Yeah, I think whilst you were saying all that, the thing that came to my mind is registration checkout, which is sort of similar, right? I mean, the length of, how long it takes for someone to check out. And, now that platforms allow you to add any kind of question, I've seen some race checkouts have some ask some completely irrelevant stuff just for the sake of it. And I can see people dropping off or people being too exuberant with colors and stuff. I think what we're saying here with surveys, what you were saying is that, the simple principle, treat it as a checkout, like get people to the finish line, get what you need out of it, and make it sort of like purpose driven.
Yeah, the perspective is you have to do what works best for the customer, and not necessarily what works best for you. And I see that on business websites all the time where, this great, wonderful idea. Business cards too, hard copy business cards where it's in a fancy script font or it's in, a really cool font type. I can't read the phone number, or I can't read the name of the business. It's too, which completely, of course, defeats the purpose of it. You can't communicate well.
So let's move on to look at some specific questions or areas of questions you may want to have in your survey. You've done this lots of times, both for your races and others. What are sort of like typical areas to survey in this process?
Again, it comes back to what's the information you're trying to gather. A lot of the standard questions, like we were talking about demographic questions, you can get those through the registration form. You can certainly ask some of those. You always put your demographic questions last, because people do perceive them as threatening. So let them get through threatening in a very, very easygoing manner. Put those last. Whatever you feel you need. To answer your questions. I'm trying to think if I don't really have, right now what I would say you should have these 3 questions for sure.
So for instance, the question you mentioned earlier in the discussion about people returning to the race, is that something that I guess most races would be interested in, wouldn't they?
Yeah, that's something you could add. You could have something along the lines of, this race was worth the entry fee. You'd phrase it a little bit nicer. Another great one is, would you recommend this event to a friend? Right? Like, what is it? The NPS?
The NPS question, yeah.
The NPS question. Certainly that would be a good one to ask.
That's a 1 to 10 question, usually, isn't it? I mean, the way I see it presented, NPS scores is like a 1 to 10, and basically 9, 10 means yes. Something like 8 to 6 means maybe, and then anything below a 6 or something is considered like a negative response or something like that.
Yeah, probably not, or whatever. Not likely, something like that.
Right. And then everything else you're saying from there would be just what specific things you wanna know about your race.
Right. So again, if it is going to give you useful, actionable information, add it. And, the part of my hesitation in responding to this is, if you think it's important to ask, go ahead, but don't put it in there just because everybody asked this. Don't put it in there just because, we really ought to ask it. Is it going to be useful? That's a question. That's going to take somebody some time to answer it. So think about whether it's an important use of someone's time.
And of course, the way in which questions are asked and phrased is also quite important. I mean, I've seen questions that have the answer in the way they're being asked, kind of thing, right? So it's very difficult to speak your true mind the way some questions are phrased.
Right. I really enjoyed that stunning course or something like that. That stunning course was, was an important part of the race, right? That's called bias. That's called introducing bias. I think the way that you prevent against that is a couple of things. I strongly recommend that you phrase questions as statements. So you're not having any type of inflection in there. So, rather than, were there enough water stops on the course? Strongly disagree, and so on. There were enough water stops along the course. It's a statement. There's much less of a emotional component to it. And it presents it as a fact and allows you to think about, do I agree with that? Do I not agree with it? Do I somewhat agree with it? The other thing that I say, and people kind of chuckle, but it's true, avoid adjectives. Because adjectives are the things that generally put the bias in there. So, the beautiful course or the delicious food or, the refreshing sports drink or something like that. And just pull those out. it also makes it for a slightly shorter survey. You have these statements that are just a very boom. Okay, done, move on. Boom. Okay, done, move on. The other thing that I recommend in making sure that people understand your survey, can understand the questions, is avoid slang or jargon. Slang, again, look at who's in your population. Do you, young people, old people, do you have people who are not native speakers of English? Everybody answering your survey is not necessarily you. Doesn't necessarily look at this question or this language from the same perspective. Slang changes over time. And I have a really amusing example involving my mother that I will share with you after we're done with this podcast. But anyway, and jargon is language or vocabulary that is typical to a specific industry. And the best example of that is information technology. They have a lot of jargon. My husband works in information technology. He's currently working from home in our office, and every now and then he will be on a conference call with his project team, and the only words that I understand through that entire call are pronouns and the conjunctions, and pretty much all the rest of it it's Klingon, it's something else. And so I warn people, be careful about asking, if this were for evaluating a track workout, do you want to do a fartlek workout or an interval? I had an example of this myself about a year ago. I got an email from an event saying, trying to figure out what would entice you to participate in this event. And one of the first things was, which of the following would entice you to participate in this event? And the first one was swag. And it was a capital SWAG, which I happen to know what swag stands for because I work with races. It should all be capitalized. But anyway, if you've never run a race before, or you've only done one race or so, and you're looking and you go, what's swag? Well, it's two things. It's frustrating. And it also sends the message that maybe you don't belong here. I don't know what this is. So this, I shouldn't have been answering the survey. And clearly I shouldn't be going to races because I don't know any of this stuff. Have someone sit back and look, and it's funny because things that you think are perfectly clear, you have someone else who's not involved in the industry or is relatively new to it, and will look and say, that really, I don't understand that, or what does that word mean, or here's what I think you're asking, and you go, oh, you know what? That's not what I intended.
Did you know that in a recent survey, 73% of responders said that reading reviews influences which races they enter? Well, RaceCheck is the largest aggregator of race reviews in the world and has collected over 40,000 reviews for over 6,000 events globally. So, how can you collect more reviews for your event and make the most of them to increase your race registrations? Well, you can start by listening to our Power of Race Reviews podcast from September 20th last year. Plenty of tips there on growing your race reviews. And then visit organizers.racecheck.com. That's organizers with an S.racecheck.com to download your free RaceCheck review box so you can start showing all your race reviews on your website for an instant boost to your race's social proof and conversions. It really is a no-brainer, so go to organizers.racecheck.com, that's organizers with an S.racecheck.com, and download your free RaceCheck review box today. Okay, let's get back to the episode. You mentioned earlier that style of question with sort of like statement and then, agree, strongly disagree kind of stuff, which definitely I can see it having an advantage of honing in with very specific questions to specific answers you want to get out. What is, I guess, the consensus on asking more open-ended questions? Things like, what did you like about our race? Or how would you recommend our race to a friend? Something like that.
Yeah. Is there anything else you want to add? Is there anything else you want to tell us about this event? That type of thing. Yeah. Open-ended text box questions. They've also been called. It's where you just, you have unlimited number of characters and you can prattle on for as long as you desire. The pros and cons of those, the benefit of something like that from the survey perspective, it's actually less work for the survey writer because you don't have to develop as many individual questions. So you just said, what are the things you liked about our race? Well, instead of trying to break that down into the registration part, the packet pickup part, the actual event, the awards, the whole different things that go into your race, we'll let them tell us. More importantly, you can get some really insightful data and comments from open-ended responses, things that you really hadn't thought about. You can also, again, if you have permission or would like to put a checkbox and say we can use your comments to market our race, pull little juicy quotes out about the event, describing the event. So that's the real benefit of it. The cons, the negatives of them, analyzing open-ended questions, doing it properly is extremely time-consuming because you have to read every single one. I'm not going to go through the whole qualitative data analysis process for you, but, not an issue if you get 15 or 20 responses. But, if you have a race that's, say, 5,000 people and you get a response rate of, 40%, and then half of those respond to the open-ended questions, that's a lot of responses to go through. It's a lot of things to look at. It is a lot of things to take into account. And ideally, you're going to look for big themes in there, which means you're going to have to read them a number of times. What I will often see in survey results where there is an open question is whoever did the analysis says, here's 3 or 4 representative comments from all of the open-ended comments. And I go, no, these are 3 or 4 comments that you thought that we should see. Kind of a little snarmy about that. But no, to do it well, it takes a very long time. But the bigger one is people hate them. Why do they hate them? Because it's a chore to fill them out. Not many people respond to open-ended. You can get, of your respondents, sometimes only 40% of them, 50% of them. And even people who are willing to take your survey, and there's some people who are kind of grudgingly, I'm not real fond of surveys, but you know what? I'm going to provide input. And they get to this open-end and they're like, nope, not going to do it. So, on the one hand, you can get great information if people respond to it. I'm in favor of them because you do get information, but I always suggest that you use them sparingly. I reviewed a survey a while ago where the first 4 questions of the survey were, it was to evaluation of a training program. What was your thoughts about the training program? What was good about it? What was bad about it? And then another one, what suggestions did you make? And I said, guys, you can't start with 4 open-ended. And they're like, oh, well, we think da-da-da. Well, it turns out in the first week, they had 325 people in the population and they had 9 responses. So I said, you can't do it. Not going to happen. Some parameters. So what are 3 things we can do to improve this event? And not just, do you have any other comments for us? So give them something to focus on, not where they have to think, oh man, what am I going to say? Or blah, blah. No, don't have time. Just going to move on. And put them last. Because people will get halfway through and see this open-ended and go, I'm done. Boom, survey closed.
In terms of sharing the final product, the survey that I've put together, first of all, what is the best time to do that in order to get the maximum response rate I can out of it?
I recommend trying to get it out as soon as feasible after the event is over. And we had talked earlier about having things set up in advance and getting ready to go. Most survey packages allow you to schedule a send date. You set everything up and you can schedule it. You're trying to capture people when the event is fresh and when they're still excited about it or their feelings are strongest about it. And that's generally within about the first 48 hours of the event. So if you can have it set, loaded, ready to go in the evening or the next day after the race, that's probably the best. You're going to get the most results in general, most responses, for any survey are going to come within your first 48 hours. And then it drops off. I do recommend sending a reminder to the people who have not responded. You generally get a little bump in responses after that. With races, though, they do the race. After a few days, they're looking to the next race. It fades quickly. Within about a week, you're probably going to get most of your responses. You're not going to get many more after about a week. So I say keep it open for maybe 10 days and then call it good.
And that's you're saying, A, because you've got people's attention after the race before they move on to something else, but also perhaps because it's all fresh to them, like the feelings, all the impression they have of the race is just there.
Right. And many of them are still excited about it. We're going to tell our friends how we did, or we're going to post it on Facebook, or, it's there. It's very vivid. They're very excited. And so when they say, oh, and here, this is from this race that I'm very excited about, I'm going to jump in and respond to this, short, well-designed survey.
And you've already mentioned sending the survey out over email. You went over, which I think is super helpful, being really upfront about why you're doing it, why someone's been selected, how long it's going to take you, how the results are going to be used, all of that really, really excellent stuff to put on the email. And of course, the link of the survey, let's not forget. Is email the only distribution channel you'd use for something like this?
I think it's the most efficient because you can load the registration list right up into a mail processor or even your registration software if you want. You could also send the link out in, say, if you're doing a newsletter. The bigger races, they'll send up a newsletter a week or so after the event to all the participants or all the registrants, thanking them, here's some numbers about the race. Oh, by the way, here's the link to the survey. And again, that's okay because it's going to the people who've registered. Where I get a little bit less excited, don't recommend, is just posting it on a public website or a public Facebook page. For those of you that completed this race, boom, here's this link. Again, you're not exactly knowing who's responding. And again, this perception of it's not very important. And I have other things to do. I'm not going to click on that link. So I think for effectiveness, and for data quality, it's best to get it straight out to the person, that was involved in the event.
Because you also want it, as you were saying earlier, to be personalized, etc., right? I mean, you want to say, hi, Laurel, we'd really value your response here.
That's ideal. You could certainly, if you don't have a first name or don't feel comfortable doing that, you can certainly see race participant. But I do think getting it as an email invitation directly to your inbox. Pretty much everybody, I can't think of a race these days that doesn't collect an email address because you need to have it for communication. So that should be a pretty easy way to do it.
Now, you mentioned earlier how effective incentives can be in getting people to fill in the survey. An interesting point I was discussing on another podcast on race reviews was that generally for race reviews, it's a bit of a tricky territory to basically be offering incentives for someone to review your race on a public website. And I think I can see sort of the complexities there. For surveys, it sounds like it's pretty straightforward, right? I mean, you're not sort of like jeopardizing the integrity of the survey by telling people we'll give you a $5 Amazon voucher or whatever.
Absolutely not. No, we're not rewarding a good response, a favorable response. What we're saying is, in exchange for your willingness to provide this feedback, we are going to randomly, you can't really, I guess, you could say we're going to give everybody who responds $5 off in their next entry. I don't know that your race director would go for that. Your treasurer probably would not. But with incentives, I think it's nice. I think there are people that really would respond well to that. The key with incentives is it has to be something everybody, or pretty much everybody, is going to be interested in. So you have to find something that's going to be of value to your entire population. You have to also find something that's going to be applicable to your entire population. So one of the common ones is, a gift card to a store, might be a local sponsor. Sometimes you get those that as part of the sponsorship will give you, 2 or 3 gift cards of reasonable value. If you draw 50% of your participants from, more than a 1-hour drive or a 2-hour drive, odds are they're not going to drive 2 hours to come back for, to use this card at this particular store. So, you think creatively what's going to appeal to the majority of your respondents based on what your population looks like, where they're coming from, demographics or whatever. And I always recommend offering more than one, because the perspective is, if there's only one, what are my odds? But when people hear that they're going to be offering 2 or 3, in their mind, that increases the odds more than the actual offering of the additional card does. So they're thinking, I have way better chance to get one of these rather than just one. So I always recommend that. You don't have to offer an incentive. Really, if there isn't something that you think would be useful and reasonable and within your budget, then you don't have to do it. But it does help. It's empirically been shown it does help.
But I guess if we go back to your point about being professional and putting the effort into it, if you would have put all the effort already to do a great survey, run the right tools, get the right responses, and you really care about the results, if offering 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 modest prizes or something or vouchers to people, it sounds to me like something you'd want to factor in to the cost of doing the survey if it's going to get you more results.
Yeah, I agree with that. And again, sometimes you can leverage some of your sponsorships to do that. Get them to contribute something of value that can be used as your incentive. And that can be very helpful. You can also, depending on your event, offer a free entry into the next year's event or a future event. For certain events, that's going to be a real, that'll be a real strong incentive. For other events, maybe not so much, depending on the size of your event, the reputation of your event, whether your event sells out or not. I did a survey a little while ago where, about 4 years ago, for the Ann Arbor Track Club of which indoor track to rent for our indoor track workouts. My incentive was a free pass to use the indoor track because I knew that was going to appeal to everybody who responded. It was relatively low cost, and it was going to be very useful, and that worked really well.
So some of the things we've been touching on throughout this discussion implicitly happen better or are part of purpose-built survey software that you get these days to do the job. Do you have some online tools that you would recommend for cost, ease of use, maybe specifically working well for race surveys? What kind of stuff do you use?
I generally use SurveyMonkey, and that one is pretty accessible. I think it is quite well known. It has many different platform options with different features. I've seen some very good surveys done on Google Forms. I'm not a real fan of Google Forms simply because it's not meant as survey software. So the number of question formats and options is somewhat limited. I don't necessarily recommend. There are a lot of other platforms out there. I really haven't had time to go in and test all of them. But I would say things to keep in mind is people ask me, what's the easiest one to use? And I go, there's a learning curve for everyone. It's software. You're not going to be able to sit right down and like magic understand how to use it. You're going to have to take some, whatever it is, to learn how to do it. There are many different platforms that have fancy features, many of which you're not going to need, some of which you will, different question types that I recommend. The advice I would give in doing this is, look at the different options out there, and don't design your survey to fit the tool, to fit the software. Look for software that best serves your purpose, that is going to allow you to create a good survey. And it's not necessarily going to be expensive because you're not doing a scientific survey. You're not going to have to do different types of question logic or skip patterns or stuff like that. You don't need that. My deal breakers when I'm looking at survey software, these are the two things that I absolutely have to have in my software package is it's got to allow a sufficient number of questions and responses. So some of the like free or basic packages will say, okay, you're allowed only 10 questions and only the first 100 responses. And that's just, if your race only had 100 people, that would work from a response perspective, but that's too limiting, I think. You're really putting out a lot of effort and you're not going to get as much in return with that. So look and make sure that you're getting that the number of responses, is sufficient for your population. You assume about 50 to 60% of the people you're sending it to. I would err on 60. You probably won't get that. And that it has enough questions. That you don't have to cut out some necessary questions. Now that might work to your advantage because you have to cut out some that you're like, well, we really shouldn't be asking that anyway. And the other thing that I think is really valuable is the ability to export a file of your responses. So you have that data, usually a CSV is what I do. So you have it. Even if you're going to be using the reporting tools within the survey software, which a lot of people do, which is great. It's a real benefit of some of them. It's your data. Take it, download it, have a copy of it, save it in your Google Drive or wherever, so that you can have it back, to look at for reference. Or if you have additional questions that come up later, here's the report, but hey, why don't we look at this? Why don't we look at this? You've got it. Those are the two things that I would always look for in choosing a survey software program.
The analysis tools that you just mentioned that you do get with most of these, I know you get it with Google Form, which is the most basic of all of them. So I'm sure SurveyMonkey and others would offer that as well.
Yeah.
Do they allow you to also do sort of like more advanced segmenting of the data, or is that something that you have to do on a spreadsheet?
No, most of them will allow that to a certain degree. These are not statistical software packages, so they don't go in and do kind of the advanced statistics, the advanced, types of research. But then again, you're probably not interested in that. You just want to know what the various segments of your population think about this. You want to be able to present the results in a manner that is very clear, that is anybody can understand, that gives you a good picture of how people feel. You can look at the result, you can look at the report, and I do this, it's not uncommon. I do a general report, and then I will go through and people will ask, well, what about this group? What about this group? And so I can go in and I can see, you pull out, select, females only. How do they respond to certain things? You can do it by age group. Certainly I think for a lot of questions on your survey, if your event has multiple races, for example, our Dexter Ann Arbor run, we have a half marathon, a 10K, a 5K. Any question that has to do with the start, with the course, I got to segment those out because otherwise it's noise. I have people that are in there that are rating 3 different courses, and looking at the aggregate of that is not helpful for any of those 3. So I would segregate those 3 out. And that's pretty easy to do. Excel is a great tool. Excel has an awful lot of functionality to it. I think most people just use it as a simple spreadsheet, but you can create formulas, you can do some statisticals. I do, if I'm doing t-tests or ANOVAs, I tend to do those in Excel. It's pretty easy. I don't need SPSS. I don't need any of the, Stata, any of those tools to do it. It's pretty easy to do that. Again, there's a little bit of a learning curve, but that's true of any software program.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we have covered so much ground, and I'm really, really grateful for all your insights here. I mean, I think we've probably gone through enough to make the process to demystify it for people, and hopefully more people would be putting together race surveys from now on. One last thing from you, if people happen to maybe have some questions or want to take this a little bit further, is there any way they can reach you, or, would you be willing to help out in maybe some people having survey questions?
Absolutely. Be glad to. Best way right now is my email address, laurelpark114@gmail.com. And just, put survey question in the subject line so I can put a filter and segregate those out from, a lot of the other spam I get. Be glad to do it. Yeah, I really enjoy it. Glad to have the opportunity to talk about this. And, I hope this isn't a chore. I appreciate the opportunity.
Well, absolutely. I mean, we appreciate having you on, and I hope you don't get inundated when people, offer up their help that generously. Sometimes, it gets a little bit overwhelming, but it's great that you're offering that help to people. I want to really thank you very, very much, Laurel, for taking the time today to talk to us about this.
Thank you.
And I want to thank everyone listening in. I hope you found it useful, and we'll see you all on our next podcast. I hope you enjoyed today's episode on Actionable Race Survey Design with Ann Arbor Track Club President Laurel Park. You can find more resources on anything and everything related to race directing on our website, racedirectorshq.com. You can also share your thoughts about designing race surveys or anything else in our Facebook group, Race Directors Hub. Many thanks again to our awesome podcast sponsors, Run Sign Up and Race Check, for sponsoring today's episode. And if you enjoyed this episode, please don't forget to subscribe on your favorite player and check out our podcast back catalog for more great content like this. Until our next episode, take care and keep putting on amazing races.